Hi, my name is Sean Brillant. I work for the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and I'm going to give you a quick presentation on the work we've been doing related to gear location marking systems for buoyless fishing gear. I'm giving this presentation on behalf of my partners in this work, Mark Baumgartner from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Leah Baumwell from Pew Charitable Trust, and Elizabeth Baker, who works with me at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. If ropeless gear is going to work, it needs to do three things in addition to being safe and suitable for commercial fisheries. It needs to get gear off the bottom of the ocean. You need to know where that gear is, and it needs to provide information for enforcement and management of that fishery as well. There's been a lot of work that's been going on how to retrieve gear from the bottom of the ocean, but there hasn't been a lot of work on how to identify or how to find gear on the seafloor when you're fishing without a buoy or a surface marking system. So this is all about trying to help advance that work. What we envision is a single gear location marking method that's going to work across all systems and for any fishery or any other activity on the ocean that may affect or be affected by those fisheries. These gear location marking systems need to work well. They need to be accurate in terms of identifying where gear is. They need to work with a variety of different systems, regardless of manufacturers, and preferably would like to see more than one system out there so that there's more than one way of doing gear location marking. How do we figure out what this is? We decided the easiest way to do this is simply to ask the stakeholders who are going to use this equipment and or be affected by its use. And this is exactly what we did. We want to note, however, we weren't funded to do this work. We have an interest in seeing ropeless fishing and buoyless fishing technology advance and improve. And without a gear location marking system, we see this as a real barrier to this. We also wanted to try and draw this information out as the governments start figuring out how they're going to manage this and where this is going to go. But ultimately, we do recognize that it's the Canadian and US governments that are going to have to take this on to identify how location marking systems are going to work and how to manage it as well. And so we just want to move that forward while that process is trying to decide how they're going to kind of do this in the first place. So the first thing we did is we set up a series of 17 meetings with different stakeholder groups. This involved 76 different people, inshore fixed gear fish harvesters, mobile fish harvesters, enforcement, Canada, US, NGOs, scientists, conservationists. All of these groups, we had quick meetings online with them over the last 18 months or so, and asked them a series of questions about how they think gear location marking systems should work to be minimally acceptable for a buoyless fishing system. We compiled all of this information together to make sure we got rid of redundancies and narrowed it down to what those requirements were. We assessed existing gear location marking technology with these requirements to see what worked best where, and completed a report in August 2021 for everyone to review and see if we got it right or got it wrong. We held a workshop in September of 2021 where we invited all of these stakeholders and many more to come together virtually and review this report to identify what those minimum requirements were, to identify our assessments of the different marking systems. And what we wanted to do is see if we could find a way to identify a gear location marking technology method that'll work best to satisfy all of these. This is also going to feed into a gear location marking fund that has been pulled together and supported by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Island Foundation, Global Impact, and a number of other partners. The purpose of this fund is to seed and support the early development of a gear location marking system that's going to satisfy these minimum requirements. There's two parts to this. The first is simply of the design, and the second phase is to support prototype development. A key part of this is that regardless of all of these possible options for gear location marking, they must be interoperable and be able to communicate with each other. It is the expectation that this gear marking fund is going to be available soon, especially now that we have some of these requirements that we're going to talk about. Please note, as I mentioned, we're not being funded to do this, nor are we decision makers or rule makers. We are not management agencies, and we do not have a commercial interest in any of this, even though there are publications related to the technologies that have been done on gear location marking. We see a need for solving this gear location marking system problem in order to advance the ability for fish harvesters to use ropeless fishing gear as a tool around whales and for accomplishing whale conservation. So as a result of the workshop, one of the key things that came out of the workshop was an ongoing discussion about the evaluation of existing and other gear location marking methods. In particular, there was a lot of discussion around acoustic modems, tonal transducers, the pros and cons of each and which we should be using. Clearly, there's much more discussion that needs to go on here. We also clearly saw that we shouldn't limit the development of a gear location marking system to existing directions and efforts that have been done, but rather to widen our ideas to see what it takes to accomplish those minimum requirements. And those minimum requirements are the second thing, and an important accomplishment of this workshop was we had good agreement on the minimum functional requirements of gear location marking systems for those people who are going to be using these systems. And that is an important roadmap that will help define what the gear location marking system needs to be for ropeless fishing systems. So I'm going to go over those right now just very quickly, but you can look at our reports, of course, and evaluate these in your own time. On the left-hand column is the different functions that we talked about, and the right-hand column are the preliminary requirements. So for example, inshore fisheries have identified a need for being able to detect ropeless, buoyless fishing gear at least half a mile out, and for long or deep water fisheries that use long trawls, they require at least a 2-mile detection radius. When you're dealing with the location, the actual location of gear on the bottom, the location accuracy should be good within 25 feet or about 8 meters. Fish harvesters and enforcement identified that this information should be integrated into a chart plotter. Gear location system should provide a variety of other important pieces of information for management as well. The data should be accessible by fish harvesters and enforcement in real time while they're at sea, and it needs to reflect reality. If it says there is something on the bottom, then it must be there as well. These location marking systems should be able to identify gear even if it is moved, presumably by accident or something, and help owners find and relocate and retrieve that gear as well. We do want to pay attention to the environmental impacts, of course, minimizing the noise in the water column, the plastics that's being used, and the frequencies that are being used if they're there. The preference is that these systems should be able to operate on a single set of batteries or a single charge for at least 6 months, and some suggest even longer. They should be integrated into the retrieval system for a buoyless system as well. These location marking systems should work in both Canada and the US, since we overlap in some areas of our fisheries. And most importantly, they must be able to communicate with any other manufacturer's gear location marking system. We can't have a variety of gear location marking systems out there that do not communicate with each other. That is a recipe for disaster. We need to make sure that they are able to communicate with each other and achieve these other location marking system minimum requirements in order to make sure that this is going to work. So what we're going to do next, we are compiling a report from that workshop to identify what these minimum requirements are and some of the ongoing discussion that took place. We will continue to gather experts who can help us work through these requirements and identify a system that will accomplish these requirements as well, or identify the specifications that are necessary for designing new systems that will meet these requirements too. And then, of course, we want to continue sharing this information with both of our federal governments, who we expect will ultimately support, deal with managing this situation and want to see the development of a gear location marking system, particularly as both federal governments are moving forward towards and encouraging more and more ropeless fishing systems as a way that will allow fish harvesters to get into areas and fish in areas that are otherwise too dangerous for traditional fishing systems. So our hope is that this is going to help advance this a bit more. Happy to hear any comments from anybody. Please reach out to any of the 4 of us. I appreciate your time, and you'll be hearing more about this in the future. Thank you very much.